What's up YouTube, Zero here, and welcome to the place where gamers, witches, wizards, and superheroes unite. Today, I have an amazing level 30 Technomancer build in Outriders. I call this the Tech Shaman build because we are focused on the Tech Shaman tree in our Technomancer. So in this video, first we're going to get into the skills and the skill points that I have allocated for this build. Then I'm going to talk about why that setup really works well. Then, after that, I'm going to get into the weapons and mods that I use on this build. And after I get into the mods, I'm going to talk about why those mods work really well together and why they work really well with this build in general. So, before we get into it, I do want to say that if you do enjoy this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more Outriders content. I do a bunch of other video games, so check those out as well. Without further ado, let's talk about the skills. So I'm using the Cryo Turret, Blighted Rounds, and Cold Snap. The Cryo Turret and Cold Snap are both gadget skills, so that's important in the Tech Shaman tree. And then Blighted Rounds is going to be a huge damage dealer and also inflict toxic on enemies. Cryo Turret and Cold Snap are going to be those skills that freeze enemies for us. Now, the Tech Shaman tree, we have Anomalous Body increasing our max health by 10%. Then we have Gadgeteer, reducing the cooldown of Cold Snap and Cryo Turret by 15%. Then we're going to go into Anomalous Body again, increasing our max health again by 10%. Then we're going to go up to Exposing Toxin every time Toxic is inflicted on an enemy. Vulnerable status is inflicted as well. And then Marked for Execution, increasing that vulnerable by 40%, making it 40% more effective. Then Fracture, enemies afflicted with freeze receive 10% more damage. Then Anomalous Body again, increasing our max health by 10%. Then Gadgeteer, again reducing our gadget skill cooldowns by 15%. Then, moving on to the next skill, we have Anomalous Body again, increasing our max health by 10%. Exposing Frost, every time freeze is afflicted on an enemy, we're inflicting vulnerable. And then Marked for Execution, again coming off of that Exposing Frost, making are vulnerable 40% even more effective. Then we're going to go into a freeze lasting 20% longer on targets. We're increasing our weapon leech. We're increasing our armor. Then we're going into Doctor of Medicine, increasing all healing by 20% for you and your allies. And really, we're just getting forward to Fracture, where enemies with freeze receive 30% more damage. And finally, Overcloak. Activating gadget skills increases your anomaly power and weapon damage by 40% for 10 seconds. For 10 seconds upon losing all health, you will receive a second chance to return to the battlefield with 50% of your max health. The effect may occur only once every 3 minutes, so that's important. And remember, our gadget skills are the Cold Snap and the Cryo Turret, so activating those is going to give us that skill. And then Wipeout, enemies below 30% health receive 20% more damage, helping us finish out some of those beefier enemies quicker. Then we're going to go down to Anomaly Fueled, increasing our anomaly power, and Toxicologist. Toxic afflicted on enemies lasts 30% longer. That's really what I wanted because we are going to try to inflict Toxic on our enemies a lot. So now that we've gone over the skill points and the skills, let's talk about why I love this setup. So let's talk about the percentages first. The Anomalous Body is going to increase our health by 40%, so it's beefing up our defense a little bit. Fracture, we have 2 skill points in that, which is going to increase our damage by 40% against frozen enemies. Overcloaked, that final skill we're putting into that Tech Shaman tree, is going to increase our damage by 40% after activating one of our gadgets. So either Cryo Turret or Cold Snap, we're increasing our weapon damage by 40%. Well, let's just use Cold Snap for an example. We have enemies rushing us, we pop Cold Snap and freeze all of the enemies within our vicinity. Now, those enemies are frozen, so they're going to receive 40% more damage. And we just activated a gadget skill. So that's going to increase our weapon damage by 40%. So that's 80% increased damage. Now let's talk about Marked for Execution. Vulnerable is 80% more effective because we went into 2 marked for executions, which really what that means is typically vulnerable increases the damage against a target by 15%. So that being 80% more effective means it's now 27%. So I want you to just remember that vulnerable with this setup is now going to inflict extra 27%, or targets are going to take 27% extra damage. And then we have our Gadgeteer, which is going to reduce our cryo turret and our cold snap by 30%. So we're going to be able to call those more often, which that's important for this build because every time we activate one of those, we get increased weapon damage by 40% for 10 seconds. So we're dealing out more damage. One of the reasons why, and we're going to see this a little bit later, that I like increasing freeze on enemies and increasing toxic on enemies is they work really well with a couple of the mods that we're going to be using. I mean, granted, these enemies are going to be taking more damage when we make toxic last longer and we make freeze last longer, and it's going to help us out defensively inflicting that freeze, offensively inflicting that toxic. But it's going to work really well with some of the mods that we're going to use. So that's one of the reasons why I choose to go into those specific skills to help us out a little bit more. So everything combined to this point really works well for this build. So now let's talk about what mods I'm using and what guns I'm using to enhance this build. So I have an LMG which has Storm Whip and Death Chains. Both of those mods are going to deal out extra damage. And I love LMGs on a lot of builds because they have a lot of bullets, and it's going to work really well with a couple of mods I'm using on my armor. Then I have a submachine gun with Storm Whip and freezing bullets. Obviously, we want to inflict a lot of freeze on enemies, so that's where my secondary can come into play. And I also have Storm Whip. I want to deal out more damage. Although you can use Amber Vault, I switch back and forth, and Amber Vault's main mod is Killing Spree, where killing shots increase damage by 25% for this weapon for 20 seconds, and that stacks up to 3 times. Obviously, it deteriorates over time, but that's a huge amount of damage. So if you have unlocked Amber Vault and you've gotten that mod can do very well as well. So I go back and forth between that mod and my freeze mod, just depending on how I'm feeling. Then on my helmet, I have Purity, which is going to reduce the duration of negative statuses by 75%. And Freezing Boost, which boosts your damage against enemies afflicted with freeze by 15%. Then on my upper armor, I have Dum Dum Bullets, increasing the assault weapon damage by 10%, and Damage Absorber, increases your armor by X amount, and resistance by 10%. So you saw how much my armor is being increased, but that increases over time. Then I have Spare Mag Bladed Rounds. The skill gets an extra mag. And Adrenaline, whenever your health drops below 30%, all of your cooldowns are reduced by 50%. So if we are on a cooldown, we can call in one of our gadgets to increase our weapons, help us out, or call in our Bladed Rounds if we need it. Then I have Trick Up the Sleeve. Bladed Rounds, while the skill is active, killing shots grant you 30% extra bullets in your mag. And Radical Therapy, we're doing 15% more damage against enemies with Toxic. Then I have Phantom Dash, which is going to dash me forward instead of the typical roll. And I have Toxic Lead. Killing shots on enemies afflicted with Toxic replenish 40% of ammo in the magazine. So now let's talk about why I love these mods for this build. So we already saw on the skills, I wanted to make sure that Toxic and Freeze was lasting longer. And we saw on some of the mods, we're dealing extra damage against frozen enemies and enemies who are inflicted with Toxic. So that's why I want those to last longer. Not only does it help me out on the battlefield, enemies that are frozen are an easy target and they're not shooting at me, so that's really good, but now they're also receiving extra damage. Furthermore, if an enemy is inflicted with Toxic, they are receiving that extra damage, that damage over time, but now they're receiving even more damage because I have that mod. So let's talk about some of these combinations. Obviously, we have the helmet, which Purity, I love Purity because for some reason, I keep getting burned. Over and over again, I keep getting burned. So reducing that by 75% is nice. And then again, I am increasing some of my damage. The Dum Dum Bullets, I just like that name, Dum Dum Bullets, but we're increasing our assault weapon damage. The Tech Shaman Tree doesn't have a lot in terms of offense, so I wanted to increase my weapon damage a little bit more. Giving me that extra 10% is nice. Damage Absorber is really going to increase your armor by a huge amount, especially as you keep leveling up. So I think that's extremely important. It makes you really beefy. Blighted rounds are going to be really the bread and butter. It's going to be the damage dealer of this build. So getting spare mag and trick up the sleeve is really nice, so I can continually have that blighted rounds. Spare mag is nice for boss battles or extremely tough enemies where you're not going to be killing other enemies to allow your LMG to reload its gun by getting kills. We saw we have a couple of mods. We have both Trick Up the Sleeve and Toxic Lead, where those two combined replenish our magazine by 70% of the ammo every time we get a kill. Unfortunately, in some of the boss battles, there's nobody to kill. So that's where spare mag can come into play. When we're facing those beefier enemies, we can at least get a second mag of our blighted rounds because that's our damage dealer. So an enemy that's afflicted with both Toxic and Freeze, we're dealing 40% more damage with our Dum Dum, our Freezing Boost, and Radical Therapy. So that's awesome. Combined with the extra damage that we're dealing from the skill tree, we are doling out a ton of damage against enemies. If you want to add that killing spree from Amber Vault, times 3, if we killed 3 enemies and then we're freezing and toxicing enemies, we're dealing 115% damage on enemies. This is just an amazing build that I love using. And I know there are probably other ways to build this, but let me know in the comment section what mods you are using on your Technomancer. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, peace.